Welcome to World of Sleepcraft. Tonight we explore one of the most beloved and enduring legends in all of gaming history, the story of Leeroy Jenkins. His name has become synonymous with reckless courage and impulsive action, a battle cry that echoes through gaming culture to this day. From a single moment of chaos in a virtual dungeon to appearances on Jeopardy and references in Hollywood films, this is a tale of how one player's charge into battle became immortal. Settle in, get comfortable, and let this story of gaming legend unfold before you. Before we begin, take a moment to prepare yourself for the journey ahead. Find a comfortable position, whether lying in bed or relaxing in a favorite chair. Allow your breathing to slow and deepen naturally. The tale you are about to hear is one of gaming history, of impulsive heroism and spectacular failure, of a moment that captured something essential about the human experience. Let the words carry you along as we explore the complete story of Leeroy Jenkins, from the world that created him to the legacy he leaves behind. This is a story that resonates across 2 decades of gaming culture, a tale that has been told and retold countless times, yet never loses its power to amuse and inspire. Whether you are a veteran of World of Warcraft who remembers seeing the original video, or a newcomer encountering Leeroy for the first time, there is something here for everyone. The themes of teamwork and individuality, of planning and action, of failure and meaning. These are universal experiences that transcend the specific gaming context. As you listen, allow yourself to be transported back to a simpler time in gaming history, when the structures and cultures we now take for granted were still being established. The world of 2005 was different in many ways, and understanding that world helps us appreciate why a simple video of a dungeon wipe became a cultural phenomenon that endures to this day. In the spring of 2005, World of Warcraft was still finding its footing as the dominant force in massively multiplayer online gaming. The game had launched only months earlier, in November of the previous year, and players around the world were still discovering its depths. Guilds were forming, strategies were being developed, and the culture of organized raiding was beginning to take shape in ways that would define the game for decades to come. On a server called Laughing Skull, a PvP realm where the dangers of the world were compounded by the threat of enemy faction players, a guild called Pals for Life was making its way through the content that Blizzard had provided. They were an alliance guild, a collection of friends who had come together to experience Azeroth as a team. Among their number was a human paladin named Leeroy Jenkins, played by a man named Ben Schultz from Colorado. Ben had been playing World of Warcraft since the open beta period, one of the early adopters who helped shape the game's community before it even officially launched. The name Leeroy Jenkins itself had an interesting origin, coming from a catchphrase and yell that Ben and his friends had used while playing StarCraft, Blizzard's earlier real-time strategy game. It was the kind of name that stuck with you, memorable and energetic, perfectly suited for charging into battle. In his regular life, Ben worked as a repair technician for industrial lighting, a job that had nothing to do with gaming or entertainment, but which provided the stability that allowed him to enjoy his hobby. He was not a professional gamer, not a streamer or content creator in an age before such careers truly existed. He was simply a player, one among millions, who happened to be in the right place at the right time to become part of gaming history. The guild Pals for Life had a philosophy that distinguished them from many other groups in the early days of World of Warcraft. While some guilds treated the game as a job, demanding strict attendance and optimal performance from their members, Pals for Life was exactly what their name suggested. They were friends first and raiders second. This philosophy would prove central to understanding the video that would make them famous. The members of the guild included Ben Vinson, who played a character named Anfrony, and who would be responsible for recording and editing the famous video. There was Jamal, whose voice would become recognizable to millions as the one running through survival calculations. There were others whose names would be preserved in gaming history simply because they happened to be in that particular group on that particular day. The early months of World of Warcraft were a time of discovery and experimentation. Players were still learning the mechanics of their classes, still figuring out how to work together effectively in dungeons and raids. The concept of threat management, where tanks had to keep enemies focused on them while damage dealers attacked from safety, was being refined through trial and error. The mathematics of the game, the numbers that determined whether a group would succeed or fail, were being calculated and shared among the community. Communication was handled through voice over IP programs, with Ventrilo being the most popular choice among serious guilds. Teams of players would gather in virtual chat rooms, their voices crackling through headsets as they coordinated their attacks. The combination of visual gameplay and voice communication created a unique social experience, one where friendships could form across vast distances, where people who had never met in person could develop bonds as strong as any formed in the physical world. Ventrilo itself became an essential part of the World of Warcraft experience for serious players. The software allowed groups to communicate in real time, coordinating attacks and calling out important information during fast-paced encounters. Learning to use Ventrilo was almost as important as learning to play one's class. A player who could not communicate effectively was a liability to their team. The audio quality of Ventrilo was imperfect by modern standards. Voices would sometimes cut out, lag would introduce delays, and the compression occasionally made it difficult to understand what someone was saying. But these limitations were accepted as the cost of doing business, minor inconveniences that paled in comparison to the benefits of real-time voice coordination. The server communities that developed around World of Warcraft were remarkably cohesive. Because players on a given server could only interact with others on that same server, reputations mattered in ways that they do not in more modern games with cross-server functionality. A player known for ninja looting or abandoning groups would find themselves blacklisted by the community. A player known for reliability and skill would be in high demand. This emphasis on server reputation created accountability that shaped player behavior. The knowledge that you would encounter the same players repeatedly encouraged cooperation and discouraged antisocial behavior. Guilds would develop reputations as well, with some becoming known for progression achievements and others for their friendly, welcoming cultures. The economy of each server was essentially self-contained. Players could only trade with others on their server, meaning that supply and demand within each community determined prices. Some servers developed strong auction house economies, while others remained more primitive in their trading practices. The economic diversity between servers added another layer of uniqueness to each community. Server forums served as the primary communication medium for many communities. Players would post about upcoming events, discuss server politics, trade items, and engage in the endless debates that characterized any online community. The forums became repositories of server history, preserving conflicts and achievements that would otherwise have been forgotten. The introduction of realm transfers and eventually cross-realm functionality would later change the nature of these communities. Server identity became less important when players could easily move between realms or group with players from other servers. Some veterans mourned the loss of tight-knit communities, while others welcomed the increased accessibility and flexibility. But in 2005, when the Leeroy Jenkins video was created, servers were still isolated communities where everyone knew everyone, or at least knew someone who knew them. This context made the video's spread all the more remarkable, as it jumped from the Laughing Skull server to the broader gaming community, and eventually to mainstream culture. It was in this context that the video which would define Leeroy Jenkins' legacy was created. The footage would capture a moment that resonated with anyone who had ever played an online game with others, a moment of careful planning undone by a single instant of impulsive action. The server on which Pals for Life played, Laughing Skull, had its own character and community. PvP servers were known for their more aggressive populations, players who chose the added danger of open-world combat with the enemy faction as part of their gaming experience. On such servers, the Horde and Alliance existed in a state of constant low-level warfare, with skirmishes breaking out wherever the two factions encountered each other. This environment bred a particular type of player, one who was comfortable with risk and accustomed to sudden violence. The members of Pals for Life had chosen this server knowing what it entailed, accepting the added challenge as part of their gaming experience. The philosophy of charging into danger without excessive preparation was perhaps more at home on a PvP server than it would have been elsewhere. The Laughing Skull community had developed its own reputation within the broader World of Warcraft population. Server forums buzzed with discussions of PvP encounters, famous rivalries between players, and the ongoing conflicts between the major guilds. In this environment, a video featuring a spectacular wipe due to one player's reckless charge would find an appreciative audience that understood exactly what had gone wrong and why it was so funny. The naming conventions and culture of different servers varied significantly in early World of Warcraft. Laughing Skull, with its menacing skull imagery and reference to orc culture, attracted players who appreciated a certain aesthetic. The server's population skewed toward those who enjoyed darker themes and more competitive gameplay, though friendly guilds like Pals for Life certainly existed alongside the more intense organizations. The Alliance and Horde balance on PvP servers was a constant topic of discussion and concern. Servers where one faction significantly outnumbered the other created frustrating gameplay experiences for the minority faction. Laughing Skull maintained a reasonably balanced population, ensuring that neither faction felt overwhelmed. This balance contributed to healthy PvP activity and a vibrant server community. Famous players on Laughing Skull had their own reputations and followings. High-ranked PvP players were recognized and respected, their appearances in the world causing excitement among those who encountered them. Guild leaders of major raiding organizations held positions of significant social influence. The server had its own celebrities, people whose fame existed entirely within the bounds of that particular community. The culture of Laughing Skull, like all server cultures, was shaped by its earliest and most influential players. The norms established in the first months of the server's existence persisted long afterward, creating patterns of behavior that new players absorbed and perpetuated. Some servers became known for friendly communities, others developed reputations for toxic behavior. Laughing Skull fell somewhere in the middle, competitive but not hostile. The Guild Pals for Life existed within this context as a counterpoint to more intense organizations. Their emphasis on friendship and casual play stood out in an environment often dominated by competitive achievement. The contrast between their philosophy and the server's general culture may have contributed to the video's appeal, highlighting the tension between different approaches to the game. The recording technology available in 2005 was primitive by modern standards. Players who wanted to capture their gameplay had to use third-party software that often impacted performance. Editing tools were less sophisticated, and the process of creating a polished video required significant time and effort. Ben Vinson's work in recording and editing the Leeroy Jenkins footage represented a genuine investment of creative energy, even if the final product appeared casual and spontaneous. The video format that would become known as machinima, films created using video game engines as their animation tools, was still in its relative infancy. World of Warcraft's combination of expressive character models and dramatic environments made it an ideal platform for this emerging art form. The Leeroy Jenkins video would become one of the most famous examples of WoW machinima, even though it was essentially documentary footage of an actual gameplay moment, rather than a scripted production. The culture of raiding in classic World of Warcraft was unlike anything that had come before in gaming. Massively multiplayer online games had existed prior to World of Warcraft, but none had achieved the same level of mainstream success or cultural penetration. The systems and social structures that developed around WoW raiding would influence game design for decades to come. Raids in World of Warcraft were designed for groups of players working together against powerful enemies. The earliest raids required 40 players to coordinate their efforts, an organizational challenge that demanded leaders with the patience and skill to herd what sometimes felt like cats with keyboards. Even smaller group content, the dungeons designed for 5 to 15 players, required careful coordination and communication. The philosophy of serious raiders was one of preparation and calculation. Before engaging any enemy, the best groups would discuss strategy in detail. They would assign roles, designate targets, plan for contingencies. The voice chat would fill with discussions of cooldowns and positioning, of who would handle which task, and what to do if something went wrong. Number crunching was an essential part of this culture. Players would calculate their expected damage output, their healing throughput, their chance of survival under various conditions. They would study the abilities of the enemies they faced, learning the timing of attacks and the telegraphs that signaled incoming danger. Some guilds maintained spreadsheets and databases, collecting data from their attempts to optimize their approaches. This mathematical approach to gaming might seem cold and calculating, removing the fun from what was supposed to be entertainment. But for many players, this was precisely where the fun lay. The satisfaction of solving a complex encounter, of finally defeating a boss that had wiped the group dozens of times before, was enhanced by the knowledge that victory came through skill and preparation rather than luck alone. The language of raiding developed its own vocabulary. Tanks were the heavily armored characters who held the attention of enemies. Healers kept the group alive through a constant stream of restorative magic. DPS, which stood for damage per second, referred both to a measurement of offensive output and to the players whose job was to deal that damage. A wipe occurred when the entire group died, forcing everyone to run back from the nearest respawn point to try again. Aggro, short for aggression, described which enemy was being targeted by which player. Managing aggro was crucial, as enemies would attack whoever had generated the most threat through damage or healing. If a damage dealer pulled aggro from the tank, they would likely die quickly, potentially causing a chain reaction that led to a full wipe. The delicate balance of threat generation was one of the most important skills for any group to master. Buffs were beneficial effects that enhanced player capabilities, while debuffs were harmful effects that needed to be cleansed or avoided. The timing of when to use powerful abilities, the management of limited resources like mana, the awareness of one's position relative to teammates and enemies, all of these factors combined to create gameplay that was simultaneously complex and engaging. The social dynamics of raid groups added another layer of complexity. Leadership was essential, as someone needed to make decisions and keep the group focused. But leaders had to balance authority with diplomacy, as players who felt disrespected or undervalued might simply leave for another guild. The best raid leaders were those who could motivate their teams while maintaining discipline, who could criticize constructively without destroying morale. Drama was an ever-present danger in guild life. Disputes over loot distribution, personality conflicts between members, disagreements about strategy or scheduling, all of these could tear a guild apart if not handled carefully. The most successful guilds developed systems and cultures that minimized drama, creating environments where players felt valued and conflicts could be resolved without destroying the group. Within this culture of preparation and calculation, there existed a tension between different approaches to the game. Some players embraced the mathematical optimization, enjoying the puzzle of maximizing their performance. Others played more casually, preferring to experience the content without worrying too much about optimal builds or perfect rotations. This tension between hardcore and casual players would define many of the conflicts within the World of Warcraft community. The hardcore approach to World of Warcraft treated the game as a serious endeavor, requiring dedication and effort. Players who adopted this mindset scheduled their real lives around raid times, researched optimal gear and talent configurations, and practiced their rotations until muscle memory took over. For these players, the satisfaction came from achieving excellence, from being demonstrably better than others at the game they all played. The casual approach viewed the game primarily as entertainment, a way to spend leisure time in an enjoyable manner. Casual players might raid when convenient, but would not sacrifice real-world obligations for virtual achievements. They accepted suboptimal performance as an acceptable trade-off for reduced stress and greater flexibility. For these players, the satisfaction came from the experience itself rather than from measurable achievement. Neither approach was inherently superior to the other. Both had their place within the gaming ecosystem. Problems arose when players with different approaches tried to play together, their expectations clashing in ways that created frustration on both sides. Hardcore players found casual teammates frustrating, while casual players felt pressured by hardcore demands. The formation of guilds helped address this tension by allowing players to self-select into groups with similar philosophies. Hardcore guilds could set strict attendance and performance requirements without alienating those who preferred a more relaxed approach. Casual guilds could enjoy the game at their own pace without facing criticism from achievement-focused players. The guild system became a crucial mechanism for managing the diversity of player motivations. The relationship between guild leadership and guild members evolved unique dynamics. Guild masters held significant power within their communities, able to set rules, resolve disputes, and direct the guild's activities. But their power was not absolute. Members who felt mistreated could simply leave for other guilds, taking their skills and social connections with them. The most successful guild leaders learned to balance authority with responsiveness to member needs. Raid leadership was a specialized skill that not all players possessed. A good raid leader needed to understand every encounter in detail, communicate instructions clearly under pressure, maintain morale during difficult progression, and manage the interpersonal dynamics of large groups. Some players who were excellent individual performers made terrible raid leaders, while others with more modest personal skills excelled at coordination and motivation. The voice chat systems that enabled raid coordination also created opportunities for social bonding. Players would chat during downtime, sharing stories from their lives outside the game, developing relationships that transcended the virtual world. Many players found that their closest friends were people they had never met in person but knew intimately through hundreds of hours of shared voice communication. The Pals for Life Guild embodied the casual end of this spectrum. Their name itself was a statement of values, emphasizing friendship over achievement. They were not a world-first guild, not a group that would be remembered for their progression achievements or their innovative strategies. But they were friends who enjoyed playing together, and that friendship would prove to be the foundation of their unexpected fame. The Paladin class that Leeroy played held a unique position in classic World of Warcraft. Alliance Paladins were holy warriors, blessed with the power of the light to heal allies, protect the weak, and smite evil. They wore heavy plate armor and carried shields, making them durable combatants. But their true strength lay in their versatility, the ability to shift between different roles depending on the needs of the group. In the raiding environment of early World of Warcraft, paladins were often relegated to healing roles. Their blessing spells, which provided significant buffs to party members, made them valuable support characters. A well-played paladin could keep their entire group enhanced with protective and empowering magic, contributing to success even without dealing significant damage themselves. However, the paladin also possessed abilities that lent themselves to the kind of impulsive charge that would make Leeroy famous. Divine Shield could make the paladin immune to damage for a brief period, allowing for aggressive plays that other classes could not attempt. Blessing of Protection could extend this immunity to allies, and the concept of the paladin as a warrior of faith, charging into battle against evil, regardless of the odds, fit perfectly with the archetype that Leeroy would come to embody. The relationship between classes in classic World of Warcraft created natural tensions within groups. Pure damage dealers often felt undervalued when loot that benefited hybrid classes like paladins dropped. Healers complained about the pressure of keeping reckless damage dealers alive. Tanks grumbled about having to chase enemies that had been pulled away by overeager attackers. These tensions were part of the social fabric of the game, creating both conflict and comedy. Understanding these class dynamics helps explain why the Leeroy Jenkins video resonated so deeply with players. Every healer had experienced the frustration of watching a damage dealer charge in before the tank was ready. Every tank had felt the helpless rage of seeing their careful positioning ruined by an impulsive teammate. The chaos of the Rookery wipe was a universal experience, magnified and crystallized into a single, perfect moment. The gear progression system of early World of Warcraft added another dimension to dungeon and raid runs. Players needed specific pieces of equipment to improve their characters, and these pieces dropped randomly from defeated bosses. This meant that groups often had to run the same content multiple times, hoping that the items they needed would finally appear. The Rookery run that would become famous was, according to the video, intended to help Leeroy obtain a specific piece of armor. This detail grounded the comedy in a relatable situation. Everyone who played World of Warcraft understood the frustration of running content repeatedly for a piece of gear that never seemed to drop. The elaborate planning of the Pals for Life group was, in theory, in service of helping a guildmate achieve his goal. That this noble purpose was undermined by Leeroy's own impulsive action added an ironic twist that enhanced the video's appeal. The group was trying to help him, and he ruined their efforts by refusing to wait for the plan they had developed on his behalf. It was the kind of situational comedy that wrote itself, a clash between good intentions and chaotic personality that anyone who had ever been part of a team could appreciate. To understand the context of the Leeroy Jenkins video, one must first understand the history of the place where it occurred. Blackrock Mountain is one of the most storied locations in all of Warcraft lore, a place where the histories of multiple races and factions intersect in conflict and tragedy. The mountain's origins trace back to the War of the Three Hammers, a devastating civil war among the dwarven clans that reshaped the political landscape of the Eastern Kingdoms. The three clans, the Bronzebeard, the Wildhammer, and the Dark Iron, had once been united under the rule of High King Modimus Anvilmar. But when the king died without a clear successor, the clans turned on each other in a struggle for dominance. The war raged for years, with each clan fighting for control of the dwarven homeland. The Bronzebeard clan, based in Ironforge, eventually emerged victorious. The Wildhammers were driven north to the hinterlands, where they would establish their own kingdom among the mountains. but it was the fate of the Dark Irons that would have the most dramatic consequences for the mountain that bears their legacy. Thaurissan, the sorcerer Thane who led the Dark Iron clan, refused to accept defeat. His people had been driven from Ironforge, forced to establish a new home in the Red Ridge Mountains to the south. But Thaurissan burned with ambition and rage, dreaming of revenge against those who had expelled his people. He launched a two-pronged assault against his enemies, sending his wife Modgood to attack the Wildhammers, while he himself led an army against Ironforge. Both attacks failed, though not without significant damage to their targets. Modgood fell in battle at Grim Battle, her dark magic seeping into the fortress and corrupting it so thoroughly that the Wildhammers eventually had to abandon it. Thaurissan's assault on Ironforge was repelled, his forces driven back in disarray. The united Bronzebeard and Wildhammer armies pursued the fleeing Dark Irons, determined to end the threat once and for all. In desperation, Thaurissan turned to powers beyond his understanding. He performed a ritual of immense power, calling out to forces he hoped would save his people from destruction. What he summoned was Ragnaros the Fire Lord, one of the four elemental lords, a being of primordial fire who had been imprisoned in the Firelands since the ordering of Azeroth by the Titans. The summoning was catastrophic beyond anything Thaurissan could have imagined. Ragnaros's emergence into the material world was so violent that it created a volcanic eruption that devastated the surrounding region. The Red Ridge Mountains were torn apart, creating what would become known as the Burning Steppes and the Searing Gorge. At the center of this devastation rose Blackrock Mountain, a massive volcano that marked the site of the summoning. Thaurissan himself was killed instantly, consumed by the very power he had called forth. His people, the Dark Iron Dwarves, survived but found themselves in a position even worse than before. Ragnaros claimed them as his servants, and for generations the Dark Irons would labor under the Fire Lord's domination, worshipping him as a god, even as they toiled in his service. Within the volcanic depths of Blackrock Mountain, the Dark Irons constructed a vast fortress under the direction of the master dwarf mason Franklorn Forgewright. This fortress, Blackrock Spire, was intended to be a symbol of Dark Iron power, a monument to their endurance and skill. But it would never truly belong to them alone. The fortress was divided into multiple sections. The lowest depths connected to the molten core, where Ragnaros himself held court in a lake of living fire. The middle sections housed the Dark Iron city of Shadowforge, and the upper reaches, known as Blackrock Spire, would become contested territory as new powers arrived to claim the mountain for their own purposes. During the First War, when the Horde first invaded Azeroth through the Dark Portal, Orcish forces discovered Blackrock Mountain and recognized its strategic value. The Shadow Council, the secret organization of warlocks who truly controlled the Horde in those early days, established a hidden refuge within the spire. The orcs claimed the upper portions of the fortress, using it as a base of operations for their campaign against the human kingdoms. The Second War saw Blackrock Spire become even more important to the Horde's war effort. With the destruction of Stormwind and the death of King Lane, the Horde pushed north into Lordaeron, using the mountain as a staging ground for their invasions. It was from Blackrock Spire that Warchief Orgrim Doomhammer launched his campaign against the alliance of Lordaeron. But the Horde's hold on the mountain would not last. The Alliance, united under the leadership of Lord Anduin Lothar, eventually turned the tide of the war. In one of the final major battles of the Second War, Alliance forces assaulted Blackrock Spire, driving the orcs from their mountain stronghold. Though Lothar himself fell in battle against Orgrim Doomhammer just outside the mountain's gates, his sacrifice inspired the Alliance to victory. With the Horde defeated and scattered, Blackrock Mountain fell into a period of relative quiet. The Dark Irons still dwelt in its depths, serving Ragnaros in the molten core, but the upper reaches of the Spire were left largely empty, a testament to the wars that had raged within its walls. During this period of relative calm, the mountain became a place of interest for scholars and adventurers seeking to understand the conflicts that had shaped it. The architecture of Franklorn Forge-Wright's fortress attracted dwarven historians who marveled at the craftsmanship, even as they lamented that such skill had been put in service of dark iron ambition. The chambers where the Shadow Council had once plotted drew warlocks seeking forbidden knowledge, hidden in the shadows. The volcanic nature of Blackrock Mountain made it inherently dangerous, even when political threats were at their lowest. Eruptions could occur without warning, sending rivers of lava through corridors that had been safe moments before. The heat was constant and oppressive, requiring magical protection for any extended exploration. Toxic fumes seeped up from the mountain's depths, making certain areas impassable without specialized equipment. The relationship between the upper and lower portions of the mountain was characterized by mutual suspicion and occasional conflict. The Dark Irons who served Ragnaros viewed anyone who entered their domain as potential enemies. The elemental servants of the Fire Lord were even less welcoming, attacking any surface dweller who ventured too close to the molten core. The upper spire, while less actively hostile, was still filled with creatures that had taken up residence in the abandoned fortress. Access to Upper Blackrock Spire in the early days of World of Warcraft required the Seal of Ascension, a ring imbued with draconic power. Obtaining this seal was a quest chain in itself, requiring players to gather gemstones from various sources around Blackrock Mountain. The red gem dropped from Warosh in lower Blackrock Spire. The blue gem came from the Black Dragonflight champions in the mountain. The green and black gems had their own sources, each requiring separate expeditions. The unadorned seal then had to be brought to Violen, who was secretly Vilastraj in disguise. This red dragon had infiltrated Blackrock Mountain to spy on Nefarian, and he aided adventurers in their efforts to challenge the Black Dragonflight's dominion. His assistance in creating the Seal of Ascension was part of a larger strategy to undermine Nefarian's power from within. The final step in creating the Seal of Ascension required forging the ring in the fires of the Black Dragonflight itself. This meant venturing into areas controlled by Nefarian's forces, finding a suitable forge, and surviving long enough to complete the ritual. The completed seal allowed passage through magical barriers that would otherwise prevent entry to Upper Blackrock Spire. This attunement process ensured that only experienced adventurers could access the upper portions of the dungeon. Players who had obtained their seals had demonstrated competence through the completion of challenging quests. The seal served as both a literal key and a symbolic certification of readiness for the challenges that lay ahead. The removal of the attunement requirement in later patches changed the character of Upper Blackrock Spire significantly. New players could now enter without having proven themselves through the Seal quest chain. While this made the content more accessible, some veterans lamented the loss of the gatekeeping function that had ensured a certain baseline of preparation. This situation would change with the arrival of a new power, one that would transform Upper Blackrock Spire into one of the most dangerous dungeons in all of Azeroth. Nefarian, son of the dragon aspect Deathwing, set his sights on the mountain as the perfect base for his sinister experiments. Nefarian was among the most cunning and dangerous of the Black Dragonflight, the children of Deathwing, who had inherited their father's corruption and malice. While Deathwing himself remained hidden, recovering from wounds sustained in the cataclysmic events of the Second War, Nefarian took it upon himself to advance the Black Dragonflight's agenda. The Black Dragon chose Blackrock Mountain as his base of operations for several reasons. The volcanic nature of the location provided the intense heat that black dragons preferred. The existing fortress infrastructure could be adapted to his needs with minimal effort, and the presence of Ragnaros and his dark iron servants in the lower reaches provided a convenient distraction for anyone who might investigate the mountain. Nefarian and his forces descended upon Upper Blackrock Spire with overwhelming force. The remnants of the horde that had lingered in the area, those who had refused to be captured and interned after the Second War, found themselves facing a new master. Rather than destroying these orcs outright, Nefarian saw an opportunity. He would use them as pawns in his schemes. Rend Blackhand was the perfect tool for Nefarian's purposes. The son of the first Warchief Blackhand, Rend had never accepted the defeat of the Horde or the leadership of Thrall's new Horde. He proclaimed himself the true Warchief, leading what became known as the Dark Horde from the upper reaches of Blackrock Spire. In exchange for Nefarian's support, Rend pledged his forces to the dragon's service. The Dark Horde was a twisted reflection of the original Horde, its members loyal only to power and conquest. Rend recruited not just orcs, but also ogres, trolls, and other creatures willing to serve his banner. The dark iron dwarves of the lower mountain viewed this new horde with suspicion, but Ragnaros cared little for the politics of the upper spire, so long as his realm remained undisturbed. Under Nefarian's guidance, the Dark Horde became more than just a military force. They became the outer defense for a much more sinister operation. Deep within the mountain, in the chambers that would become known as Blackwing Lair, Nefarian conducted experiments that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in the manipulation of life itself. The Black Dragon sought to create a new dragonflight, one that combined the strengths of all the existing flights while eliminating their weaknesses. He captured members of other dragonflights, subjecting them to horrific procedures in his attempts to unlock the secrets of their power. The results were chromatic dragons, unstable creatures that wielded multiple types of breath weapons, but suffered from unpredictable mutations and shortened lifespans. But Nefarian's ambitions extended beyond the creation of new dragons. He sought to build an army capable of conquering Azeroth, fulfilling the goals that his father had been forced to abandon. The Dark Horde provided the ground troops. The Black Dragonflight and their chromatic creations would serve as the aerial force, and the various creatures bred within the mountain would fill whatever roles remained. Among these creatures were the whelps that populated the rookery, the breeding grounds located within Upper Blackrock Spire. Dragon whelps were young dragons, relatively small compared to their adult counterparts, but still dangerous in sufficient numbers. The rookery was filled with eggs and juvenile dragons, constantly producing new soldiers for Nefarian's army. The whelps themselves were fascinating creatures from a biological standpoint. Dragon young began their lives within eggs, absorbing elemental energy from their environment as they developed. Black dragon eggs drew upon the volcanic heat of Blackrock Mountain, infusing the developing dragons with an affinity for fire that would serve them throughout their lives. Upon hatching, whelps emerged hungry and aggressive, their instincts driving them to attack any perceived threat. They possessed rudimentary breath weapons, able to spit small gouts of flame that, while not devastating individually, could cause significant damage when deployed by dozens of whelps simultaneously. Their scales were softer than adult dragons, but still provided meaningful protection against mundane weapons. The social structure of dragon whelps in the rookery was relatively simple. They responded to the presence of adult dragons with instinctive deference, recognizing the authority of their elders without needing to be taught. When adult dragons were absent, the whelps would follow their own instincts, attacking potential threats and feeding on whatever prey was available. The eggs themselves required specific conditions to develop properly. The volcanic heat of Blackrock Mountain provided the warmth necessary for incubation, but the eggs also needed periodic attention from adult dragons. The black dragonflight's careful husbandry of the rookery ensured a steady supply of new whelps, maintaining Nefarian's army at full strength, even as battles claimed the lives of many young dragons. Players who entered the rookery faced a unique challenge in that the enemies were not initially visible. The eggs appeared harmless at first glance, indistinguishable from decorative elements of the environment. Only when the eggs hatched did the true danger become apparent, as whelps emerged in numbers that could quickly overwhelm an unprepared group. The design of the rookery encounter taught important lessons about controlled pulling and spatial awareness. Groups had to understand which areas would trigger egg hatches and plan their movements accordingly. The most successful groups designated specific pullers who would move with surgical precision, triggering only the eggs they intended to while leaving others undisturbed. Communication was essential in the rookery. The tank needed to know when to move forward. The damage dealers needed to know which targets to prioritize, and the healers needed to position themselves safely away from potential spawn points. A group that communicated well could clear the rookery efficiently. A group that did not communicate often found themselves wiping repeatedly. The experience of learning the rookery was formative for many early World of Warcraft players. It was one of the first encounters that truly punished reckless play while rewarding careful coordination. The lessons learned in the rookery applied to countless later encounters, making it a kind of classroom for raid mechanics. Some players developed genuine fondness for the rookery despite its difficulty. The encounter had a certain purity to it, a clear relationship between careful play and success. There were no gimmicks or complex mechanics, just the fundamental challenge of controlling a large number of enemies. For players who enjoyed that style of gameplay, The rookery was deeply satisfying. Others viewed the rookery with dread, remembering countless wipes caused by careless teammates or simple bad luck. The room became associated with frustration and repair bills, a symbol of everything that could go wrong in a dungeon run. These players hurried through the area as quickly as possible, hoping to minimize the chances of disaster. Significance of the rookery extended beyond its military purpose. It represented the future of Nefarian's plans, the next generation of the forces he was building. Destroying the eggs and whelps within would be a significant blow to the Black Dragon's ambitions. This made the rookery a prime target for any adventurers who sought to challenge Nefarian's power. For players entering Upper Blackrock Spire in the early days of World of Warcraft, the rookery presented a specific kind of challenge. The room was filled with dragon eggs that would hatch when disturbed, releasing whelps that would swarm the group. The key to success was controlling the engagement, pulling small numbers of enemies at a time rather than triggering a chaotic mass spawn that would overwhelm the healers. This required patience and coordination, precisely the qualities that the Pals for Life Guild's famous video would demonstrate and then spectacularly subvert. The layout of the rookery itself contributed to its difficulty. The room was large and roughly circular, with dragon eggs scattered across the floor in clusters. The eggs themselves appeared innocuous, oval shapes that glowed faintly with the heat of the developing dragons within. But disturbing them, whether by proximity or by area of effect abilities, would cause them to hatch immediately. The whelps that emerged were individually weak by endgame standards, but they made up for their fragility with numbers. A single whelp could be killed in seconds by a competent group. A dozen whelps attacking simultaneously became a serious threat, and if a group managed to trigger all the eggs in the room at once, they would face a swarm of 50 or more enemies that could overwhelm even the best prepared party. The solution, as any experienced player knew, was careful pulling. The group's tank would approach a small cluster of eggs, triggering only those whelps to hatch while the rest of the room remained dormant. The group would quickly dispatch these enemies, then move to the next cluster, methodically clearing the room section by section. The process was time-consuming but safe, trading speed for reliability. Of course, this methodical approach required everyone in the group to cooperate. One player running ahead could trigger eggs prematurely. One area of effect spell cast at the wrong time could hatch an entire section of the room. One moment of impatience could transform a controlled encounter into chaos. The rookery was a test of discipline as much as a test of combat skill. The specific challenge facing Pals for Life on the day of the famous video was compounded by the need to navigate past the eggs to reach their actual objectives. The bosses of Upper Blackrock Spire lay beyond the rookery, and the group could not simply ignore the room and hope for the best. They had to clear it one way or another before proceeding deeper into the dungeon. The devout shoulders that Leeroy supposedly sought were a piece of priest armor, though the video attributes them to the paladin's goals. This minor inconsistency is one of several details that suggest the staged nature of the video, though it does nothing to diminish its appeal. The item itself dropped from a boss deeper in the dungeon, giving the group a clear objective beyond simply completing the instance. It was a day like any other for the members of Pals for Life. They had gathered in Upper Blackrock Spire, one of the premier endgame dungeons of classic World of Warcraft, to farm for gear and experience the content. The group consisted of about a dozen players, their characters ranging from warriors and rogues to mages and priests, each filling a necessary role in the group's composition. Their target for the day included the Rookery, the dragon whelp breeding area that stood between them and the bosses deeper in the dungeon. The challenge of the Rookery was well known among experienced players. The eggs that covered the floor would hatch if players got too close, spawning whelps that would attack en masse. A careless group could easily trigger dozens of whelps at once, leading to a chaotic fight that often ended in a total party wipe. The voice chat was active with discussion, the players talking through Ventrilo as they planned their approach. This was standard practice for serious content, the kind of coordination that distinguished successful groups from those who repeatedly failed. But on this day, the level of detail in the planning reached almost absurd heights. Jamal's voice came through the voice chat, outlining a complex strategy for handling the Rookery. He spoke of divine intervention, a paladin ability that could make a target immune to damage for a short time, but would also prevent them from taking any actions. He calculated percentages, discussing the group's survival rate based on various factors. 32.33%, repeating, of course, he stated with false precision. The other players chimed in with their own contributions to the plan. They discussed crowd control options, the timing of abilities, the order in which enemies should be killed. The conversation was a parody of the over-planning that sometimes characterized serious raid groups, the tendency to calculate and theorize to an excessive degree. Through all of this discussion, one voice was notably absent. Leeroy Jenkins, the paladin played by Ben Schultz, was not participating in the planning. His character sat motionless in the game, his player clearly away from the keyboard. The reason for his absence would become one of the most quoted lines in gaming history. After what felt like an eternity of planning, with survival percentages calculated and divine intervention cooldowns discussed, there was a moment of quiet. The group seemed ready to execute their carefully crafted strategy, and then a voice cut through the silence. "All right, time's up. Let's do this. Leeroy Jenkins." The cry echoed through the voice chat as Leeroy's character charged forward into the Rookery. The careful plans, the calculated percentages, the discussions of cooldown timing, all of it became instantly irrelevant as one player decided that he had waited long enough. "Oh my God, he just ran in," someone said, disbelief evident in their voice. The statement captured the moment perfectly, the sudden realization that everything they had planned was about to be thrown into chaos by a single impulsive action. Save him! The command came quickly, the instinct to help a teammate overriding the shock of what had just happened. The group rushed forward to try to rescue their wayward paladin, but in doing so they triggered exactly the kind of mass spawn they had been planning to avoid. Eggs hatched in waves, dozens of whelps emerging to attack the suddenly overwhelmed adventurers. The chaos that followed was a masterclass in everything that could go wrong in a dungeon encounter. Whelps swarmed the healers, preventing them from keeping the group alive. The tanks lost control of the situation, unable to hold the attention of so many enemies at once. Damage dealers fell one by one, their hit points rapidly depleted by the constant attacks. The visual spectacle of the wipe was almost beautiful in its totality. Character after character fell, their death animations playing out as the whelps continued their assault. Health bars dropped from full to empty in moments, the healers unable to keep up with the incoming damage. The screen became a chaos of enemy nameplates and spell effects, a swirling maelstrom of virtual violence that captured the essence of an overwhelming encounter. The audio matched the visual chaos perfectly. Multiple voices spoke at once, some shouting instructions, others expressing disbelief, still others simply groaning as their characters died. The overlapping voices created a wall of sound that communicated panic and confusion more effectively than any single clear statement could have. This audio mix perfectly captured the experience of being in a raid that has gone catastrophically wrong. The positioning of characters during the wipe told its own story. Healers who had been safely in the back found themselves surrounded by whelps. Damage dealers who had rushed forward to help Leeroy now regretted leaving their established positions. The tank, whose careful positioning had been rendered irrelevant, could only watch as enemies attacked from every direction. It was a complete breakdown of the organized structure that successful groups depended upon. "Stick to the plan," someone shouted, though there was no plan that could salvage the situation at this point. The careful strategies they had discussed were meaningless in the face of the overwhelming number of enemies they now faced. God damn it, Leeroy. The frustration was palpable as the group watched their chances of success collapse around them. They had spent so much time preparing, calculating, discussing, and it had all been for nothing. One by one, the characters fell. The voice chat filled with the sounds of disappointment and frustration as players watched their characters die. The wipe was total and complete. Every member of the group killed by the swarm of whelps that Leeroy's charge had triggered. In the aftermath, as the players contemplated the run back from the graveyard, someone asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "Leeroy, what the hell?" The tone mixed anger with a kind of bewildered amusement, and Leeroy's response would become as famous as his battle cry, "At least I have chicken." The statement was a reference to the reason Leeroy had been away from his keyboard during the planning session. He had been making himself a plate of chicken, prioritizing real-world hunger over virtual strategy. It was the perfect capstone to a moment of absurdity, a reminder that at the end of the day, World of Warcraft was just a game, and sometimes a player just wanted to eat their chicken and charge into battle. The video of the Leeroy Jenkins incident was recorded by Ben Vinson, who played the character Anfrani in Pawls for Life. Vinson edited the footage, combining the game capture with the voice chat to create a cohesive narrative of the disaster. On May 11th, 2005, he uploaded the video to Warcraft Movies, a site that hosted user-created content related to World of Warcraft. The video spread rapidly through the early internet landscape. In 2005, YouTube was only a few months old and had not yet become the dominant video platform it would later be. Viral videos spread through forums, email chains, and specialized gaming sites. The Leeroy Jenkins video found an audience that resonated with its message. Players who had experienced similar moments of chaos caused by impulsive teammates. The humor of the video worked on multiple levels. On the surface, It was a simple tale of one player ruining a carefully planned strategy through reckless action. But beneath that surface was a sharp parody of the raiding culture that had developed in World of Warcraft, a culture that sometimes took itself far too seriously. The excessive planning in the video, with its absurd precision and calculated survival percentages, lampooned the tendency of some players to overanalyze every aspect of the game. The idea that anyone would calculate a survival rate to 2 decimal places, repeating, was itself a joke about the mathematical obsession that characterized hardcore gaming culture. At the same time, the video celebrated the kind of impulsive, damn the consequences gameplay that many players secretly enjoyed. Leroy's charge into battle was reckless and stupid, but it was also undeniably fun in its own way. There was something liberating about watching someone throw caution to the wind and just go for it, even if the result was disaster. The phrase, "at least I have," chicken became a kind of mantra for a certain approach to gaming. It represented the idea that real life, with its simple pleasures like a plate of chicken, was ultimately more important than any virtual achievement. It was a reminder not to take the game too seriously, to remember that the point of playing was to have fun. The question of whether the video was real or staged became a topic of intense debate in the gaming community. Some viewers insisted that no group could be that disorganized, that the excessive planning and the perfectly timed interruption had to be scripted. Others pointed to their own experiences with chaotic guild members as evidence that such things could absolutely happen organically. Years after the video's release, the truth emerged. Pals for Life confirmed that the video was indeed staged, a scripted parody created to make fun of guilds that took the game too seriously. However, they maintained that it was based on a real event, a faithful reenactment of something that had actually happened to them at some point. Ben Vinson, who recorded the video, later explained their surprise at the reaction. "We didn't think anyone would believe it was real," he said. "We thought it was so obviously satire." But the video had tapped into something universal about the gaming experience, a recognition that resonated with players regardless of whether the specific incident was authentic. The staged nature of the video, once revealed, did little to diminish its popularity or cultural impact. If anything, it enhanced appreciation for the skill with which the parody had been crafted. The voice acting, the timing, the perfect escalation from over-planning to chaos to resignation, all of it had been carefully constructed to maximize comedic effect. The technical execution of the video demonstrated considerable skill given the tools available in 2005. Recording gameplay required third-party software that could capture screen activity at reasonable quality without destroying system performance. The voice chat had to be recorded simultaneously, requiring additional software or hardware solutions. Synchronizing the audio with the video in post-production required patience and attention to detail. The editing choices made by Ben Vinson enhanced the comedic impact of the footage. The video begins with a long stretch of planning discussion, allowing the audience to become familiar with the overly analytical approach of the group. This setup makes the payoff, when Leroy's charge interrupts everything, more satisfying. The pacing builds naturally from careful preparation to sudden chaos to resigned acceptance. The audio mix balanced the various voices effectively despite the limitations of ventrilo's compression and the multiple people speaking at once. Key lines were clearly audible at crucial moments, ensuring that viewers could follow the narrative of the disaster. The famous battle cry cut through the planning chatter with perfect clarity, making its impact unmistakable. The camera work within the game, controlled by the player recording the footage, managed to capture the key moments of the encounter despite the chaos. Viewers could see Leeroy charging forward, could witness the eggs hatching and whelps emerging, could observe the group's desperate attempts to salvage the situation. The visual storytelling complemented the audio perfectly. The choice to include the full planning session at the beginning rather than cutting straight to the action was crucial to the video's success. Without understanding just how much preparation the group had undertaken, the impact of Leeroy's impulsive charge would have been diminished. The contrast between the elaborate strategy and the simple "at least I have chicken" created the comedic tension that made the video memorable. The length of the video, approximately 2.5 minutes, was ideal for viral distribution in the early internet era. It was long enough to tell a complete story, but short enough to be easily shared and rewatched. Viewers could watch it multiple times, catching new details with each viewing, noticing the reactions of different guildmates or the progressions of the wipe. The resolution and compression of the original video were standard for the era, but seem almost quaint by modern standards. The lower quality actually added to the authenticity of the footage, making it clear that this was captured by amateur enthusiasts rather than professional content creators. The slightly fuzzy visuals and compressed audio marked the video as genuine gaming content rather than polished marketing material. In the years since its release, higher quality versions of the video have been uploaded, often remastered or upscaled using modern technology. But many viewers prefer the original quality, finding that the artifacts and limitations add to the nostalgic appeal. The video represents a specific moment in gaming history, and its visual characteristics are part of that historical record. The dry run video that was released in 2017 provided additional context for the original. This earlier take showed the same basic scenario, but with less polished execution, revealing the iterative process by which the final version was created. For dedicated fans, this behind-the-scenes glimpse added another layer to their appreciation of the original. The impact of Leeroy Jenkins extended far beyond the World of Warcraft community. The video became one of the first truly viral gaming phenomena, spreading to audiences who had never played the game and never would. The name Leeroy Jenkins became cultural shorthand for rushing into any situation without proper preparation. In 2007, just 2 years after the original video's release, Leeroy Jenkins appeared as a clue on Jeopardy! The iconic television quiz show. The question appeared in a category about memes and internet culture, asking contestants to identify the World of Warcraft character whose impetuous charge into battle became an internet sensation. For a video game meme to appear on such a mainstream program demonstrated how thoroughly Leeroy had penetrated popular culture. Television shows referenced Leeroy Jenkins as a way of signaling awareness of gaming culture to their audiences. How I Met Your Mother, the popular sitcom about a group of friends in New York City, included a Leeroy Jenkins reference in one of its episodes. The show Barry, about a hitman who wants to become an actor, also found occasion to reference the famous charge. Perhaps the most significant mainstream exposure came from Toyota's advertising campaign. The automobile manufacturer created a World of Warcraft themed commercial for the Toyota Tacoma truck, featuring characters from the game in a driving scenario. Leeroy Jenkins appeared in the advertisement, bringing his famous battle cry to a whole new audience of potential consumers. Hollywood took notice as well, though the references ended up on the cutting room floor. Deleted scenes from the 2009 films Year One and Monsters vs. Aliens both included Leeroy Jenkins references that were ultimately removed from the final releases. These cuts suggest that while studio executives saw the cultural relevance of the meme, they may have been uncertain about how it would play with general audiences. Video games outside of the Blizzard ecosystem began incorporating Leeroy Jenkins references as Easter eggs and homages. The most notable appearance came in Mass Effect, BioWare's acclaimed science fiction role-playing game. Players could encounter a character named after Leeroy, a subtle nod to the influence the World of Warcraft meme had achieved across the gaming industry. The phenomenon inspired academic interest as well. Researchers studying internet culture and viral media pointed to Leeroy Jenkins as an example of how content could spread through digital networks. The video became a case study in what made something shareable, what qualities allowed a piece of content to break out of its original niche and reach a mass audience. The language of Leeroy Jenkins entered common usage among gamers and beyond. To pull a Leeroy became a recognized phrase, meaning to rush into a situation without adequate preparation. Teams in various competitive games would warn each other not to Leeroy when patience was required. The name had transcended its origin to become a universal concept. Businesses and motivational speakers co-opted the Leeroy Jenkins approach as an example of bold action versus paralysis by analysis. While the original video showed the negative consequences of rushing in unprepared, some reinterpreted it as a celebration of decisive action. Better to charge forward imperfectly, some argued, than to plan forever and never act at all. The real Ben Schultz, the man behind the virtual legend, found himself suddenly famous in a way that few video game players ever experienced. He received an invitation from Electronic Arts, one of the largest video game publishers in the world, to become a game tester. The offer represented a path from amateur enthusiast to professional involvement in the gaming industry. Schultz turned down the offer, preferring to maintain his regular job as an industrial lighting repair technician. His decision reflected the same priorities that his character had embodied in the video itself. At the end of the day, gaming was a hobby, not a career. He had his chicken, metaphorically speaking, and that was enough. The choice to remain anonymous, to not capitalize on the sudden fame, spoke to a humility that enhanced the legend rather than diminishing it. In an age when internet fame could be leveraged into careers and endorsement deals, Schultz chose to step back and let the character speak for itself. Leeroy Jenkins existed as a creation separate from his creator, a digital entity with a life of its own. The meme spawned countless parodies, remixes, and tributes over the years. Musicians incorporated the battle cry into songs. Animators recreated the scene in various artistic styles. Writers referenced Leeroy in stories and articles. The original video became the starting point for an entire ecosystem of derivative content, each new creation adding to the legend while pointing back to the source. The timing of the Leeroy Jenkins video proved crucial to its success. In 2005, viral video was still a relatively new phenomenon. YouTube had only just launched, and the mechanisms by which content spread through the internet were still being established. Leeroy Jenkins was among the first major gaming memes to achieve widespread recognition, paving the way for countless others that would follow. The video's format also contributed to its staying power. Unlike text-based memes that could be easily replicated and remixed, the Leeroy Jenkins video required viewers to watch the actual footage. This meant that the original context was always preserved, the full joke always apparent. People did not just share the battle cry, they shared the entire build-up and payoff, ensuring that new viewers experienced the content as it was meant to be seen. The audio quality of the original video, while imperfect by modern standards, actually enhanced its appeal. The crackle of ventrilo voice chat, the overlapping voices, the slight distortion of certain words, all of these artifacts gave the video an authentic feel that polished productions could not match. It sounded like real gamers communicating in real time, because that was exactly what it was, even if the specific incident had been staged. International audiences discovered and embraced Leeroy Jenkins, translating the concept even when the specific language was lost. The battle cry itself required no translation, the elongated vowels and enthusiastic delivery transcending linguistic barriers. Gamers in countries around the world adopted Leeroy as their own, recognizing in him a universal archetype of impulsive enthusiasm. The 20th anniversary of the video, which occurred in 2025, prompted a wave of retrospective coverage. Gaming journalists wrote articles examining the video's impact and legacy. Podcasts dedicated episodes to discussing what Leeroy Jenkins meant to gaming culture. The milestone served as an opportunity to reflect on how much the gaming landscape had changed since that fateful day in Upper Blackrock Spire, and how certain constants remained the same. Some argued that Leeroy Jenkins represented a simpler time in gaming, before the professionalization of esports and the dominance of streaming culture. In 2005, games were still primarily played for fun, and spectacularly failing at them could be just as entertaining as succeeding. The video captured that spirit of playful chaos, a reminder that games were meant to be enjoyed rather than optimized. Others saw Leeroy Jenkins as the beginning of gaming's integration into mainstream culture. The video's viral success demonstrated that gaming content could appeal to audiences beyond the core gaming community. It helped establish the paradigm that would eventually lead to gaming becoming the dominant form of entertainment media globally. The debate over Leeroy's cultural significance continues to this day, scholars and enthusiasts alike finding new angles from which to analyze the phenomenon. Is he a symbol of liberation from oppressive structure, a cautionary tale about the dangers of impulsive behavior, a celebration of friendship and the bonds formed through shared gaming experiences? Perhaps he is all of these things simultaneously, a multifaceted icon whose meaning shifts depending on who is doing the interpreting. Blizzard Entertainment, the company behind World of Warcraft, recognized the cultural phenomenon that Leeroy Jenkins had become and took steps to honor the character within the game itself. This recognition would come in multiple forms over the years, cementing Leeroy's status as one of the most famous characters in World of Warcraft history. The first major recognition came at BlizzCon 2007, the annual convention where Blizzard celebrated its games and community. Ben Schultz, the real person behind Leeroy Jenkins, was invited to attend as a special guest. On stage, in front of thousands of cheering fans, he recreated the famous moment. Leeroy Jenkins. His battle cry echoed through the convention hall, met with thunderous applause from an audience that knew exactly what they were witnessing. The appearance at BlizzCon demonstrated how fully Blizzard had embraced the Leeroy Jenkins phenomenon. Rather than viewing the video as embarrassing, a demonstration of player failure in their game, the company recognized it as a celebration of the community they had built. The chaos and the humor were as much a part of World of Warcraft as the epic boss battles and intricate lore. World of Warcraft's Wrath of the Lich King expansion, released in November 2008, brought the first in-game recognition of Leeroy Jenkins. The expansion introduced an achievement system, a feature that awarded players for completing various tasks and challenges throughout the game. Among the thousands of achievements available was one titled Leeroy, deliberately misspelling the name with the extended vowel sound that characterized the famous battle cry. The achievement was directly tied to the location of the original video. Players could earn it by killing 50 rookery whelps in Upper Blackrock Spire within 15 seconds. This was essentially the opposite of what the Pals for Life group had been trying to do in their video, where careful pulling had been the goal. To earn the achievement, players had to intentionally trigger the massive spawn that had caused the original wipe and then kill all the whelps before the timer expired. Completing this achievement awarded the player the title Jenkins, which could be displayed after their character's name. Suddenly, the servers of World of Warcraft were populated with characters bearing names like Throg Jenkins and Lightbane Jenkins, players proudly displaying their connection to the famous meme. The World of Warcraft trading card game, a physical collectible card game based on the video game, included a Leeroy Jenkins card released on October 25th, 2006. The card's artwork was created by Mike Krahulik, one of the artists behind the popular gaming webcomic Penny Arcade. The card depicted Leeroy in his characteristic plate armor, charging forward with reckless abandon. In the trading card game, the Leeroy Jenkins card was a powerful but risky option, fitting for a character known for impulsive action. It provided significant benefits when played, but also came with drawbacks that could backfire on the player, mechanically representing the chaotic nature of its namesake. When Blizzard launched Hearthstone, their digital card game set in the Warcraft universe, Leeroy Jenkins naturally made an appearance. The Hearthstone version of Leeroy was a legendary minion card, one of the rarest and most powerful cards in the game. True to his character, Leeroy had the charge ability, allowing him to attack immediately when played. However, playing him also summoned 2 whelps for the opponent, a direct reference to the eggs that hatched during the original video. The Hearthstone Leeroy Jenkins card became notorious in the competitive scene. His ability to deal 6 damage immediately made him a powerful finishing option, capable of ending games in unexpected fashion. For years, Leeroy was a staple of aggressive decks that sought to end games quickly. The card was eventually moved to Hearthstone's Hall of Fame in 2020, removing it from the standard competitive format due to its prevalence in the metagame. The competitive history of Leeroy in Hearthstone paralleled the character's legacy in interesting ways. Just as the original Leeroy had charged into battle without concern for consequences, the Hearthstone card enabled similarly explosive plays. Players would hold Leeroy in their hand, waiting for the moment when his damage output would end the game before the opponent could respond. The phrase, Leeroy, became as recognizable in Hearthstone as it was in World of Warcraft, shouted by streamers and commentators when the famous card appeared. The whelps that Leeroy summoned for the opponent created strategic considerations that added depth to the card's design. If the opponent survived Leeroy's attack, they would have 2 additional minions on their side of the board. This meant that playing Leeroy at the wrong time could backfire spectacularly, giving the opponent resources they could use to turn the game around. The risk and reward of the card perfectly captured the essence of its namesake. Combo decks found particularly effective uses for Leeroy. By combining him with other cards that could copy his attack or give him additional attacks, players could burst down opponents from significant health totals. The rogue class, with its cheap spells that could trigger additional attacks, became particularly associated with Leeroy combo finishes. Tournament matches would sometimes end in spectacular fashion as a rogue player assembled the pieces needed to deal 20 or more damage in a single turn. The eventual Hall of Fame induction of Leeroy Jenkins was a recognition of both his power and his cultural significance. The Hall of Fame was reserved for cards that were either too powerful for standard play or so iconic that they deserved special recognition. Leeroy qualified on both counts, his consistent presence in aggressive decks, making him a design constraint that limited what other cards could safely be printed. Players who owned Leeroy received a full dust refund when he was moved to the Hall of Fame, compensation for losing access to the card in standard format. But many players chose to keep their copy regardless of the refund, valuing the sentimental connection to one of Hearthstone's most beloved characters over the in-game resources they could have gained. In March 2022, Leeroy Jenkins debuted as a playable mercenary character in Hearthstone's Mercenaries game mode. This new mode featured different gameplay from the traditional card game, focusing on building teams of characters who progress through various challenges. Leeroy's inclusion gave players the opportunity to directly control the famous paladin, guiding him through encounters where his impulsive nature could finally be channeled toward victory rather than disaster. The mercenary version of Leeroy retained the flavor of his card appearance while expanding on his abilities and personality. His skills and equipment options reflected his nature as an aggressive damage dealer who threw caution to the wind. Players who recruited Leeroy could customize his build to emphasize his strengths, creating a version of the character that succeeded where the original had spectacularly failed. The presence of Leeroy across multiple Blizzard games, from World of Warcraft to Hearthstone to Heroes of the Storm, demonstrated the company's recognition of his cultural significance. He had become a mascot of sorts, a character whose appeal transcended the specific game that had birthed him. New players encountering Leeroy in Hearthstone might have no idea about the original video, yet they would come to understand his personality through his card design and presence in the game. The integration of Leeroy into Blizzard's broader ecosystem of games created an interesting phenomenon. Players who knew Leeroy from different sources would bring different associations to the character. World of Warcraft veterans remembered the original video and the chaos it depicted. Hearthstone players knew Leeroy as a powerful finisher and combo enabler. Heroes of the Storm players recognized him as a playable hero with his own unique abilities. All of these experiences contributed to a multifaceted understanding of a character who had started as a simple joke. Heroes of the Storm, Blizzard's multiplayer online battle arena game, included Leeroy Jenkins as a playable hero. In this context, players could directly control Leeroy, leading him into the 5-on-5 team battles that characterized the genre. The hero version of Leeroy emphasized his aggressive playstyle, with abilities that rewarded players who charged into combat rather than hanging back. The design of Leeroy in Heroes of the Storm captured the essence of his character while adapting it to the different gameplay context. His abilities encouraged reckless aggression, with significant payoffs for players who embraced the Leeroy philosophy. At the same time, truly impulsive play would usually result in death, teaching players that even Leeroy-style aggression required some thought about timing and target selection. Skins and cosmetic options for Leeroy in Heroes of the Storm allowed players to customize his appearance while maintaining his essential character. Some skins referenced his paladin origins, while others explored alternative fantasies for the character. The customization options demonstrated Blizzard's recognition that players wanted to express themselves through their favorite characters. The presence of Leeroy across multiple Blizzard titles created a kind of transmedia continuity. A player might encounter Leeroy first in Hearthstone, become curious about his origins, and discover the original video. Or a World of Warcraft veteran might enjoy controlling their favorite meme character directly in Heroes of the Storm. The cross-pollination between games enriched the experience of each individual title. This transmedia approach to character development was relatively novel in the gaming industry at the time. While movie franchises had long used multiple media to expand their stories, games were only beginning to explore the possibilities. Leeroy Jenkins became an early example of how a character could exist across multiple game genres while maintaining a coherent identity. The success of Leeroy across platforms encouraged Blizzard to integrate other popular characters into multiple games. Heroes like Thrall, Jaina, and Arthas appeared in Hearthstone, Heroes of the Storm, and other Blizzard titles, creating a shared universe that rewarded players familiar with the company's entire catalog. The strategy proved effective at building brand loyalty and encouraging players to try games they might otherwise have ignored. For fans of Leeroy Jenkins specifically, the multiple appearances created numerous opportunities to engage with their favorite character. Collectors could obtain Leeroy-related items across several games, from Hearthstone cards to Heroes of the Storm skins to World of Warcraft achievements. The character's ubiquity ensured that his legend would not be forgotten, even by players who had never seen the original video. The recognition from Blizzard extended beyond gameplay mechanics to include appearances within World of Warcraft's evolving story. Leeroy Jenkins transitioned from player joke to actual non-player character, appearing in the game world where players could interact with him. These appearances would continue to expand over the years, giving Leeroy an ongoing presence in the game that had made him famous. The Warlords of Draenor expansion, released in November 2014, brought the most significant integration of Leeroy Jenkins into World of Warcraft's actual content. The expansion redesigned Upper Blackrock Spire as a level-appropriate dungeon for the new expansion, and within this revamped instance, players could find and recruit Leeroy himself. The premise of Warlords of Draenor involved time travel and alternate timelines. The Iron Horde, an army of orcs from an alternate past, had invaded Azeroth through the Dark Portal. Upper Blackrock Spire served as a staging ground for their invasion, occupied by Iron Horde forces under the command of Warlord Zaela. Within this redesigned dungeon, players could encounter Leeroy Jenkins in an unexpected state. His body lay in the Rookery, the same location where his famous charge had occurred years earlier. The implication was clear. Leeroy had charged into the Rookery once again, and once again the results had been fatal. Some things never changed. But Leeroy's story did not end with his death. On heroic difficulty, players with resurrection abilities could bring Leeroy back to life. This resurrection began a 15-minute countdown, 900 seconds, during which Leeroy would eventually charge forward toward his goal. Recovering his devout shoulders, a piece of armor from the son of the beast. The setup was deliberately absurd and self-referential. Leeroy's fixation on obtaining specific armor was a callback to the original video, where the elaborate plan had supposedly been intended to help Leeroy get a piece of gear. Now, resurrected and determined, Leeroy would attempt to complete the task he had set out to do years earlier. The challenge for players was keeping Leeroy alive long enough to reach his goal. Because the dungeon was designed for Warlords of Draenor level characters, Leeroy's classic-era statistics made him woefully underpowered. He would charge forward through the dungeon, attacking enemies along the way, and would almost certainly die unless players cleared the path ahead of him. The process of completing this achievement required careful coordination. Players had to resurrect Leeroy after defeating the second boss of the dungeon, then race ahead to clear the trash enemies between him and his destination. The timer added pressure, forcing groups to balance efficiency with thoroughness as they worked to protect their reckless charge. If Leeroy successfully reached the son of the beast and recovered his devout shoulders, players were rewarded with the achievement Leeroy. The question mark at the end captured the bemused disbelief that characterized the original video's reaction. The achievement also allowed players to recruit Leeroy as a garrison follower. The garrison system in Warlords of Draenor allowed players to build and manage their own base of operations. Followers could be recruited to work at the garrison, undertaking missions that provided rewards for the player. Leeroy Jenkins, once recruited through the Upper Blackrock Spire achievement, became an epic Retribution Paladin follower available to assist in these missions. As a garrison follower, Leeroy had unique characteristics that reflected his personality. His abilities and traits were designed to evoke his famous impetuousness, making him a distinctive addition to any player's roster of followers. The presence of Leeroy in the garrison system meant that players could continue to interact with him even outside of the dungeon where he had become famous. The integration of Leeroy into Warlords of Draenor content represented a significant evolution in how Blizzard treated the character. He had gone from player joke to achievement reference to actual game content, a non-player character with his own quest line and ongoing presence in the world. This evolution would continue in subsequent expansions. The reimagined Upper Blackrock Spire that housed Leeroy's encounter was a fascinating study in how Blizzard approached dungeon design in the Warlords era. The same location that classic players remembered had been transformed by the Iron Horde's occupation, creating a space that felt both familiar and new. Veterans of the original instance could recognize certain layouts and configurations while still experiencing genuinely new content. The Iron Horde itself represented a significant departure from the Blackrock occupants of earlier eras, where Nefarian's forces had been a mixture of corrupted dragons and Dark Horde remnants. Warlord Zayla's forces were disciplined Orcish warriors from an alternate timeline. The iron aesthetic dominated the redesigned dungeon, with massive metal machinery and brutal fortifications replacing the more organic chaos of the Black Dragonflight's rule. Within this new context, finding Leeroy's body in the rookery was simultaneously a callback to the original video and a commentary on the character's unchanging nature. Even in a completely transformed dungeon, facing entirely different enemies, Leeroy had still managed to die in the exact same location, doing the exact same thing. His commitment to charging into danger was apparently strong enough to transcend alternate timelines and decades of game development. The specific mechanics of the Leeroy Resurrection encounter required players to plan their approach carefully, creating an interesting irony given the character they were trying to save. Groups had to discuss strategy, coordinate their abilities, and time their actions precisely, all to help the most impulsive character in World of Warcraft history reach his goal. The parallel to the original video was intentional and obvious. The journey through the dungeon with Leeroy following behind created memorable moments for players who undertook the challenge. Watching the famous paladin charge ahead into groups of enemies, sometimes surviving through luck and sometimes dying immediately, perfectly captured the spirit of the original video. Groups found themselves simultaneously protecting Leeroy and laughing at his antics, experiencing firsthand the mixture of frustration and affection that his original guildmates must have felt. The reward of Leeroy as a garrison follower gave players ongoing incentive to complete the achievement. Having Leeroy available for missions meant that his presence would continue long after the dungeon run was finished. Players could send him on various tasks throughout the Warlord's expansion, imagining the chaos that his impulsive nature must have caused on each mission. The garrison follower system itself was one of the defining features of Warlords of Draenor. Players built and managed their own bases, recruiting followers who would assist in various activities. The collection aspect of this system appealed to completionists, while the strategic elements engaged players who enjoyed optimization puzzles. Leeroy Jenkins became one of the most sought-after followers precisely because of his cultural significance, even if his actual in-game statistics were not exceptional. The inclusion of Millhouse Manastorm as another potential follower from Upper Blackrock Spire created a companion piece to Leeroy's story. Millhouse, a gnome mage known for his own mimetic status within the game, could also be recruited through a special encounter. The presence of both characters in the same dungeon spoke to Blizzard's awareness of their community's favorite personalities and their willingness to celebrate those favorites in official content. The eventual removal of the garrison system from prominence in later expansions meant that Leeroy's role as a follower became somewhat obsolete, but the achievement remained, and players who had completed it could always look back on their garrison roster and see Leeroy's name among their recruited followers. The memory of the encounter persisted even after the game systems moved on. The Warlords of Draenor treatment of Leeroy demonstrated how game developers could honor community culture while creating engaging content. The encounter was not merely a reference, it was a fully realized game experience that rewarded players with meaningful rewards. The balance between nostalgia and functionality ensured that the content remained worthwhile, even for players who had no emotional connection to the original video. The 15-minute timer that governed Leeroy's resurrection created memorable moments of tension and coordination. Groups that successfully completed the challenge often celebrated together, sharing in the satisfaction of protecting their reckless companion through dangerous territory. The achievement became a badge of honor, proof that a group had worked together effectively, even when babysitting the most impulsive paladin in World of Warcraft history. The success of the Leeroy encounter in Warlords of Draenor influenced how Blizzard approached similar opportunities in later content. References to community culture became more common, with developers finding ways to honor memorable moments and characters from the game's history. The Leeroy model demonstrated that such references could be integrated seamlessly into gameplay rather than existing only as superficial Easter eggs. Players who had been present during the original video's release found the Warlord's content particularly meaningful. Rescuing Leeroy and guiding him to his goal felt like closing a circle that had been open since 2005. The character who had become famous for causing a wipe could finally, with player help, achieve the objective that had supposedly motivated his original charge. The emotional resonance of this narrative completion surprised many who experienced it. What had started as a comedic video took on deeper meaning when players could actually help Leeroy succeed. The transformation of tragedy into triumph, of failures into redemption, gave the character an arc that the original video never intended, but that the community embraced wholeheartedly. New players who encountered the Leeroy content without knowing the backstory were often intrigued enough to seek out the original video. The game content served as an introduction to gaming history, teaching newer players about a formative moment in World of Warcraft culture. This educational function ensured that the legend would continue to be passed down to future generations. The legacy of Leeroy Jenkins continued to grow with each passing year and each new World of Warcraft expansion. Blizzard found opportunities to include the character in various events and content updates, ensuring that new generations of players would encounter the famous paladin. During World of Warcraft's anniversary events, which occur each November to celebrate the game's release date, Leeroy Jenkins made regular appearances. Players who visited the Caverns of Time, a location where the Bronze Dragonflight maintains portals to significant moments in history, could encounter Leeroy among the celebrants. His presence at these anniversary events served as a reminder of the game's rich history and the culture that had developed around it. The Vanguard of the Light provided another opportunity for Leeroy to appear in game content. This organization, dedicated to fighting against demonic and undead threats, counted Leeroy among its forces. Players encountered him at the Parhelion Plaza on the Isle of Quel'Danas during battles against the Devouring Host, fighting alongside other heroes of the Alliance. Boralis, the capital city of Kultiras, introduced in the Battle for Azeroth expansion, also hosted Leeroy Jenkins at various times. His appearances in different locations throughout the game world demonstrated Blizzard's commitment to keeping the character relevant and visible to players, even as the game's content continued to expand and evolve. Each appearance reinforced the same essential characteristics that had made Leeroy famous in the first place. He remained a paladin, a warrior of the light who charged into battle with more enthusiasm than sense. His dialogue and behavior in these appearances echoed the personality established by the original video, maintaining consistency with the legend that players had come to know and love. The visual design of Leeroy as an NPC drew upon the iconic imagery of the original video. He wore the plate armor associated with paladins, the kind of gear that suggested a warrior of moderate experience rather than a legendary hero. His appearance was deliberately ordinary, reflecting the fact that his fame came not from exceptional power, but from a single moment of impulsive action. The voice lines given to Leeroy in his various appearances captured the spirit of the original character. References to chicken, impatient declarations about the need to get moving, and of course, variations on his famous battle cry, all featured in his dialogue. Players who encountered Leeroy in the game world were treated to callbacks that demonstrated Blizzard's understanding of what made the character beloved. The placement of Leeroy in various game locations suggested an ongoing story for the character. He was not confined to Upper Blackrock Spire, the site of his original fame, but appeared across Azeroth wherever adventure beckoned. This suggested that Leeroy had continued his impulsive approach to life, charging into situations throughout the world with the same enthusiasm that had made him famous. Interactions with Leeroy in the game world gave players a sense of connection to gaming history. Also, new players who had heard of Leeroy Jenkins but never seen the original video could experience the character firsthand. Veterans could enjoy the nostalgic references while introducing newer friends to the legend. The NPC appearances created a bridge between the external meme culture and the internal game world. The decision to integrate Leeroy so thoroughly into official World of Warcraft content raised interesting questions about the relationship between player creativity and corporate ownership. The character and the video were created by players, not by Blizzard, yet they became part of the official game world. The boundaries between community creation and official content became blurred in ways that benefited both the company and the community. Other games have attempted to create their own Leeroy Jenkins moments with varying degrees of success. Developers have learned that such phenomena cannot be manufactured. They emerge organically from the interaction between game design and player behavior. The best that designers can do is create environments where memorable moments are possible, then hope that players will generate content worth remembering. The meaning of Leeroy Jenkins evolved over time within gaming culture. In the immediate aftermath of the video's release, being compared to Leeroy was an insult, a suggestion that someone was reckless and inconsiderate of their teammates. But as the years passed and the video became more fondly remembered, the comparison took on different connotations. For some, Leeroy represented the spirit of fun that should underlie all gaming. He was a reminder not to take virtual worlds too seriously, to remember that games were meant to be enjoyed rather than optimized to the point of tedium. His famous charge was an act of liberation from the tyranny of spreadsheets and survival percentages. For others, Leeroy remained a cautionary tale about the importance of coordination and communication in team activities. His actions in the video demonstrated how one person's impulsive behavior could affect an entire group, a lesson applicable far beyond the world of gaming. The story of Leeroy Jenkins could be used to teach about teamwork, patience, and the consequences of individual actions in collaborative environments. The character also came to represent a particular approach to life that had both advocates and critics. The Leeroy approach, charging forward without overthinking, appealed to those who felt paralyzed by excessive planning and analysis. Sometimes, these advocates argued you just had to make a decision and commit to it, even if the outcome was uncertain. Better to fail spectacularly than to never try at all. Critics of this philosophy pointed to the very video that popularized Leeroy as evidence of its flaws. The whole group wiped because of his impulsive action. The careful planning, while perhaps excessive in its detail, would likely have resulted in success if it had been followed. Rushing in without preparation led to disaster, not glory. This tension between action and preparation, between spontaneity and strategy, gave Leeroy Jenkins a depth that simple gaming memes rarely achieved. He became a symbol that could be interpreted multiple ways, a mirror that reflected different values depending on who was looking. The philosophical implications of Leeroy Jenkins extended into discussions of game design itself. His famous charge highlighted the fundamental tension between player freedom and structured content. Games that allowed for Leeroy-style chaos were often more memorable than those that strictly controlled player behavior, yet that chaos could also frustrate players who preferred orderly progress. Developers studying the Leeroy Jenkins phenomenon found lessons for their own work. Some concluded that the best games created space for both careful planning and impulsive action. Others focused on designing encounters that punished recklessness while remaining enjoyable even when they went wrong. The video became a touchstone for discussions about what made multiplayer games compelling. The social dynamics captured in the video resonated with researchers studying online communities. The mixture of frustration and affection that the guildmates displayed toward Leeroy reflected patterns seen in many collaborative environments. The way the group immediately tried to save their wayward teammate, even as they cursed his impulsiveness, spoke to the bonds that formed through shared virtual experiences. Psychology researchers found the Leeroy Jenkins video useful for discussing concepts like groupthink and risk assessment. The elaborate planning session before Leeroy's charge could be seen as an example of analysis paralysis, where excessive deliberation prevents action. Leeroy's response, while extreme, represented a breaking point that many people had experienced in their own collaborative environments. The video also raised questions about authenticity and performance in online spaces. The revelation that the incident had been staged but based on a real event created a spectrum of authenticity that characterized much internet content. Was the video less meaningful because it was performed rather than spontaneous? Most viewers concluded that the truth of the emotions and relationships depicted mattered more than whether the specific incident was genuine. The concept of the Leeroy Jenkins moment entered business and management literature as well. Consultants and authors used the story to illustrate various points about team dynamics, risk management, and the dangers of both over-planning and under-planning. The universality of the situation, a team's careful work, undone by one member's impulsive action, made it applicable far beyond the gaming context that spawned it. Some organizations adopted at least "I have chicken" as an informal motto, a reminder not to take setbacks too seriously. The phrase captured an acceptance of failure that many corporate cultures struggled to embrace. If the worst happened and the plan fell apart, at least you had your metaphorical chicken, the simple pleasures and relationships that mattered more than any project outcome. The meme's endurance through multiple generations of internet culture testified to its fundamental appeal. As other memes rose and fell, Leeroy Jenkins remained relevant, continually rediscovered by new audiences. The video's availability on various platforms ensured that it could never be completely forgotten, always waiting to introduce another viewer to its particular blend of chaos and humor. The 20th anniversary of the video saw major gaming publications producing retrospective content about Leeroy's impact. These articles traced the evolution of the meme from its origins to its current status, examining how its meaning had shifted over 2 decades of technological and cultural change. The consensus was that Leeroy Jenkins had earned his place in the permanent canon of gaming culture. Modern recreations of the original video, whether as parodies or tributes, continued to appear regularly. Content creators would stage their own versions of the famous charge, sometimes in World of Warcraft itself, and sometimes in other games entirely. These recreations demonstrated the video's ongoing relevance while introducing new audiences to the original. The Leeroy Jenkins phenomenon also sparked discussions about intellectual property and ownership of cultural artifacts. The video was created by players using Blizzard's game, making its legal status somewhat ambiguous. Blizzard's decision to embrace and incorporate Leeroy into their official content could be seen as a tacit endorsement of player creativity, a recognition that the community could create value that enhanced rather than diminished the company's products. The relationship between player-created content and official game development has evolved significantly since the Leeroy Jenkins video. Modern game companies actively encourage and support content creation, recognizing its marketing value and community-building potential. Leeroy Jenkins was one of the early examples that demonstrated how player creativity could enhance a game's cultural presence. The infrastructure for sharing gaming content has also transformed dramatically. What once required specialized software and manual distribution now happens automatically through built-in recording features and streaming platforms. The barriers to creating the next Leeroy Jenkins have fallen dramatically, even as the competition for attention has intensified. Yet despite the proliferation of gaming content, few moments have achieved the cultural penetration that Leeroy Jenkins managed. The video caught lightning in a bottle, a combination of timing, content, and cultural readiness that created something truly transcendent. Attempting to replicate its success has proven nearly impossible, which only adds to its legendary status. The study of viral content has identified several factors that contributed to Leeroy's success. The video was relatable, depicting a situation that anyone who had played team games would recognize. It was humorous without being cruel, poking fun at gaming culture while clearly coming from a place of affection. It was brief enough to watch multiple times without significant time investment. And it arrived at a moment when the infrastructure for sharing video content was just beginning to mature. The emotional journey of the video was carefully structured, whether intentionally or not. Viewers begin in a state of comfortable familiarity, listening to the kind of strategic discussion that characterizes serious gaming. The sudden interruption of Leeroy's charge creates a spike of surprise and excitement. The chaos that follows generates tension, and the final line provides a release, a moment of absurdist humor that resolves the tension and leaves viewers satisfied. This emotional structure is common to many forms of effective storytelling. The setup, the complication, and the resolution form a narrative arc that the human brain finds inherently satisfying. The Leeroy Jenkins video achieved this structure in under 3 minutes, demonstrating that viral content does not require length to be effective. The universal applicability of the Leeroy concept extended its appeal beyond gaming audiences. Anyone who had ever been in a situation where careful planning was disrupted by impulsive action could relate to the video's message. Team sports, workplace collaborations, academic group projects, all of these contexts featured their own versions of Leeroy Jenkins, people whose enthusiasm outpaced their patience. This universality allowed the meme to spread beyond gaming communities into broader culture. People who had never played World of Warcraft could still understand and appreciate the video. They might not grasp all the technical details, might not know what a paladin was, or why the rookery was dangerous, but they understood the fundamental human dynamics on display. The longevity of the Leeroy Jenkins meme defied expectations. Many viral phenomena burn bright and fade quickly, forgotten within months of their initial popularity. Leeroy has persisted for 2 decades, continuously rediscovered by new audiences while remaining relevant to those who remember the original. This staying power suggests that the video tapped into something more fundamental than typical viral content. Some researchers have suggested that Leeroy Jenkins represents an archetype, a fundamental human type that exists across cultures and contexts. The impulsive warrior, the person who charges forward regardless of consequences, appears in mythology and literature throughout history. Leeroy is simply the gaming culture's contribution to this eternal category of human behavior. The archetype resonates because most people contain some element of Leeroy within themselves. The desire to act decisively, to break free from the constraints of planning and analysis, is universal even among those who usually suppress it. Watching Leeroy charge into the rookery provides a vicarious thrill, a brief fantasy of liberation from the careful consideration that governs most adult behavior. At the same time, the video validates those who prefer careful planning. The wipe demonstrates that Leeroy's approach has real consequences, that impulsive action can lead to failure. Viewers can enjoy the thrill of the charge while simultaneously feeling vindicated in their own more cautious approaches. The video offers something for everyone. As you drift toward sleep, imagine yourself standing at the entrance to Blackrock Mountain. The massive volcanic peak rises before you, its slopes marked by the scars of ancient cataclysm. Smoke drifts from vents near the summit, evidence of the fires that still burn within. This is one of the most storied locations in all of Azeroth, a place where history has been written in blood and flame. The path into the mountain leads through carved stone corridors, past dwarven architecture that speaks of the craftsmanship of Franklorn Forge-Right. The walls are warm to the touch, heated by the volcanic activity that permeates the entire structure. Torches are unnecessary here, as the ambient glow of magma provides all the light one could need. The air carries the scent of sulfur and heated metal, not unpleasant, but undeniably intense. This is a place of elemental power, where the boundary between the material world and the firelands grows thin. You can feel the pulse of energy that flows through the mountain, the heartbeat of Ragnaros's former domain. Climbing through the levels of the mountain, you pass through areas that have seen countless battles. The molten core lies somewhere below, the seat of the Fire Lord's power. Blackwing Lair lurks above, where Nefarian once conducted his terrible experiments. And here, in the middle reaches, sits Upper Blackrock Spire, the scene of perhaps the most famous moment in World of Warcraft history. The rookery is quiet now, its eggs long since destroyed by countless adventurers seeking achievement and glory. The floor, where whelps once swarmed in overwhelming numbers, is bare stone, marked only by the memory of what once occurred here. If these walls could speak, they would tell tales of triumph and tragedy, of careful planning and impulsive charges. Picture Leeroy Jenkins standing at the threshold of the rookery, as he did all those years ago. His plate armor gleams in the volcanic light, blessed by the light he serves as a paladin. Behind him, his guildmates are discussing strategy, calculating percentages, planning for contingencies. The voice chat crackles with earnest discussion, and then, in a moment that would echo through gaming history, he decides that he has waited long enough. Time's up. Let's do this. The battle cry erupts from him as he charges forward, heedless of consequences, focused only on the moment and the action before him. The chaos that follows is catastrophic, yes. The wipe is total and complete, but there is something admirable in that charge, something that speaks to a part of us that chafes against excessive caution and endless deliberation. Sometimes, Leeroy seems to say, you just have to go for it. The memory of that moment has outlasted the game content that spawned it. Upper Blackrock Spire has been redesigned multiple times. The original rookery no longer exists in the form it took in 2005, but the legend persists, carried forward by players who remember and new players who discover the story for the first time. Gaming communities are built on shared experiences, moments that bring strangers together through common reference and understanding. The Leeroy Jenkins video is one such moment, a piece of cultural touchstone that transcends the specific game it came from. When someone yells Leeroy Jenkins before charging into a situation, everyone who hears knows exactly what is about to happen. Let your thoughts drift to the gaming memories that mean the most to you. Perhaps you have your own Leeroy moment, a time when planning gave way to impulsive action, when everything went wrong in the most entertaining way possible. Perhaps you remember late nights with friends, gathered around screens, sharing in virtual adventures that created real connections. These memories are precious in their own way, no less valuable for occurring in digital worlds rather than physical ones. The laughter shared over a catastrophic wipe, the triumph of finally defeating a challenging boss, the quiet satisfaction of helping a teammate achieve their goals, all of these moments contribute to a rich texture of experience that defines who we are as gamers and as people. The fires of Blackrock Mountain burn eternally, fed by forces that predate mortal memory. But the fires of gaming passion burn just as bright, passed from generation to generation of players who discover the joy of shared virtual experience. Leeroy Jenkins became a symbol of that passion, a reminder that games are meant to be played with enthusiasm and joy. Rest now as this tale comes to its close. Let the warmth of shared memories wash over you, comforting and familiar. The battles are done for today, the dungeons cleared, the achievements earned. There is nothing more you need to do tonight, but let sleep claim you. Feel the weight of your body settling into wherever you rest. Let the tension drain from your shoulders, from your neck, from the muscles of your face. The concerns of the day fade like the glow of a dying campfire, leaving only comfortable darkness and the echoes of the story you have heard. The world of Azeroth continues its endless cycle, even as you prepare for sleep. Somewhere in that digital realm, players are gathering in groups, planning their approaches to challenges both old and new. Voice chat channels crackle with discussion, strategies are debated, and every so often, someone decides that they have waited long enough and charges forward without waiting for the plan to be finalized. These moments of chaos and laughter are the lifeblood of gaming communities. They create the stories that players tell each other years later, the shared references that bind strangers together through common experience. The Leeroy Jenkins video captured one such moment and preserved it forever, but similar moments occur every day in games around the world. Think now of your own gaming experiences, whether in World of Warcraft or in any other virtual world you have visited. The first time you stepped into a new zone and marveled at its beauty. The struggle against a difficult boss, the repeated failures giving way eventually to triumph. The friendships formed through shared challenges, relationships that transcended the games where they began. These memories have value because you created them. They are part of who you are, experiences that shaped your understanding of cooperation, competition, and community. The time you spent in virtual worlds was not wasted. It was invested in building connections and creating moments that you will carry with you throughout your life. Gaming has evolved dramatically since the days of the Leeroy Jenkins video. Graphics have improved, gameplay has become more sophisticated, and the social features that connect players have grown more robust. But the fundamental appeal remains unchanged. People gather in virtual spaces to share experiences, to face challenges together, and to create memories that matter. The warmth you feel now, listening to this story, is the warmth of belonging to something larger than yourself. Millions of people have watched the Leeroy Jenkins video, have laughed at the chaos, have quoted the battle cry in their own moments of impulsive action. By knowing this story, you are connected to all of them, part of a community that spans the globe. Let that sense of connection comfort you as you drift toward sleep. You are not alone in your appreciation of gaming culture. You are not alone in finding meaning in virtual experiences. The communities you have joined, the friendships you have formed, the memories you have created, all of these are real and valuable, regardless of the medium through which they occurred. The glow of your screen fades to darkness, but the stories you have experienced remain, treasured memories stored in the theater of your mind. Leeroy Jenkins charges forward in eternal loop, his battle cry echoing through the years, a moment of perfect impulsive joy preserved forever in the amber of internet history. At least I have chicken. The words carry a wisdom all their own, a reminder that simple pleasures matter, that the physical world waits patiently while we adventure in virtual ones. The chicken was more important than the raid in the end. Real life, with its small comforts and daily needs, takes precedence over any game. The culture of gaming continues to evolve, new memes rising to prominence, while old ones fade into fond memory. But some legends endure, their appeal transcending the specific contexts that created them. Leeroy Jenkins is such a legend, a name that will be recognized for as long as people play games together. If you enjoyed this tale of gaming legend, please like and subscribe to the channel for more stories from the worlds of Warcraft and beyond. Leave a comment with your own memories of Leeroy Jenkins, your own stories of impulsive charges and spectacular failures. Share the moments that made you laugh, the wipes that became treasured memories, the times when everything went wrong in exactly the right way. The community that has grown around this channel is built on shared love of gaming lore and the comfort of familiar stories. Each listener brings their own experiences and memories, enriching the collective appreciation of the tales we explore together. Your engagement, whether through comments or subscriptions or simply listening, contributes to a community that spans the globe. The stories we tell have power. They connect us to each other and to our own pasts. The memory of playing World of Warcraft, of discovering the Leeroy Jenkins video for the first time, of laughing with friends over shared gaming disasters, these memories shape who we are. They are part of the texture of our lives, no less real for occurring in virtual spaces. Consider the impact that gaming has had on your own life, the skills you have developed, the friends you have made, the experiences you have had. All of these came through games. The hours spent in virtual worlds were not wasted. They were invested in yourself, in your relationships, in your understanding of collaboration and competition and creativity. Leeroy Jenkins represents a particular moment in gaming history, but he also represents something timeless about human nature. The impulse to act, to charge forward, to embrace chaos rather than endless planning. This is part of who we are as a species. Games give us safe spaces to explore these impulses, to experience the consequences of reckless action without real-world penalties. The lesson of Leeroy is not simply that planning is good or that impulsiveness is bad. The lesson is more subtle, that both approaches have their place, that the tension between them creates drama and humor and meaning. The best teams find ways to accommodate different personalities, channeling the energy of their Leeroys while providing the structure that more cautious members need. In your own life, be gentle with the Leeroys you encounter. They may frustrate you with their impatience, may disrupt your carefully laid plans, may charge forward when you would prefer to wait, but they also bring energy and enthusiasm that more cautious people sometimes lack. The world needs its planners and its chargers, its careful calculators and its impulsive warriors. And be gentle with the Leeroy within yourself. That part of you that wants to just do it, that chafes against endless analysis, that would rather fail spectacularly than never try at all, that part has value too. Sometimes the best approach really is to take a deep breath, shout your battle cry, and charge into the unknown. Gaming brings us together in ways that would have been impossible only decades ago. Players from around the world connect through shared experiences, forming friendships that span continents and cultures. The legacy of Leeroy Jenkins is part of that connection, a common reference that unites gamers regardless of when they started playing or what server they call home. The voice chat grows quiet now. The planning session ended. The dungeon cleared or wiped. It matters little which. What matters is that we were there together, sharing in the experience, creating memories that will last long after the servers eventually go dark. Good night, dear listener. May your dreams be filled with adventure and laughter, with impulsive charges and spectacular victories, with the warmth of community and the joy of shared experience. May you wake refreshed and ready for whatever challenges await, knowing that sometimes the best approach is simply to take a deep breath, yell your battle cry, and charge forward into the unknown. The story of Leeroy Jenkins reminds us that perfection is not required for meaning. The video captured a spectacular failure, yet that failure became more beloved than countless successful dungeon runs that no one remembers. Sometimes the disasters are what we treasure most, the moments when everything went wrong in ways we could never have predicted. In your own life, you will have Leeroy moments, times when you charged forward before the plan was ready, when your enthusiasm outpaced your preparation, when the chaos that followed taught you lessons that careful success never could. These moments may seem like failures in the moment, but they often become the stories you tell for years afterward. The balance between caution and action is one that every person must find for themselves. Leeroy Jenkins represents one extreme of that spectrum, but his enduring appeal suggests that many of us secretly admire those who throw caution to the wind. There is freedom in the charge, a release from the anxiety of endless planning and the paralysis of overthinking. Yet there is also wisdom in preparation, in understanding the challenges you face before confronting them. The guildmates who spent so long planning their approach to the rookery were not wrong to do so. Their careful strategy, had it been followed, would likely have resulted in success. The question of which approach is better has no universal answer. It depends on the situation, on the stakes, on the nature of those involved. For now, as you drift toward sleep, let yourself release the need to answer that question. The planning is done, the decisions made, the day completed. Whatever challenges await tomorrow can be faced tomorrow. Tonight is for rest, for the quiet comfort of darkness and warmth, for the gentle fading of consciousness into the realm of dreams. Imagine yourself in a peaceful place, far from the volcanic heat of Blackrock Mountain, far from the chaos of the rookery. Perhaps it is a quiet forest glade, where soft grass cushions your rest, and the sound of distant birds provides gentle music. Perhaps it is a comfortable room, familiar and safe, where the light is dim and the temperature perfect. Perhaps it is somewhere else entirely, a place unique to you where you have always felt most at peace. In this peaceful place, the concerns of the world cannot reach you. The deadlines and responsibilities, the challenges and conflicts, all of these fade into irrelevance. There is only now, only this moment, only the gentle embrace of rest that your body and mind have earned through another day of living. Your breathing slows naturally, finding a rhythm that requires no conscious effort. Each inhale brings fresh energy. Each exhale releases tension you may not have known you were carrying. The body knows how to rest if the mind will allow it, and your mind is ready now to step back from its constant vigilance. The muscles of your face relax, smoothing the furrows that concentration and concern had carved into your features. Your jaw unclenches, your eyes rest easy behind closed lids, your forehead smooths as if someone had gently wiped away the worry lines. This is what relaxation feels like, a softening of the physical tension that mirrors the release of mental stress. Your shoulders drop away from your ears, no longer braced against the challenges of the day. The weight that you have been carrying, the responsibilities and expectations that settle on you each morning, slides away for these precious hours of rest. You have permission to set down your burdens, to simply be rather than constantly doing. Down through your arms, the relaxation spreads, loosening muscles that have been tensed for typing, for lifting, for all the tasks that hands must perform. Your fingers uncurl from fists you may not have known you were making, resting easy against whatever surface supports them. The joints of your wrists and elbows ease, no longer held in positions of readiness. Your back, which carries so much of your weight and stress, releases its tension vertebra by vertebra. The spine that has been held rigid all day allows itself to curve naturally, supported by whatever surface cradles you. The muscles along either side of your spine, which work constantly to keep you upright, finally rest, trusting in the support beneath you. Through your hips and legs, the wave of relaxation continues, releasing the muscles that have carried you through another day of movement. Your feet, which bear your weight through countless steps, finally have nothing to support. They rest, warm and comfortable, their work complete until morning calls them to duty again. This is the gift of sleep, the daily retreat that allows you to function during waking hours. Without this restoration, the body would fail, the mind would fragment, the spirit would wither. Sleep is not weakness or laziness. It is essential maintenance, as necessary as food or water to continued existence. Allow yourself this gift without guilt or resistance. The world will continue without your attention for these few hours. The plans that need making can wait until morning. The decisions that require your input will still be there when you wake. For now, there is nothing required of you but rest. In your dreams, perhaps you will visit Azeroth or some other world of wonder. Perhaps you will fly over fantastic landscapes, speak with characters you have only known through screens, experience adventures that defy the limitations of physical reality. Dreams are the mind's playground, where the rules that govern waking life hold no power. Or perhaps your sleep will be dreamless, a deep and restorative darkness that passes in what feels like moments. Both types of sleep serve their purpose, and your body will choose what it needs. Trust in that wisdom, the ancient programming that has kept organisms alive and healthy since life first developed the capacity to rest. The night stretches before you, hours of peace in which your body will repair itself, your mind will process the experiences of the day, and your spirit will find renewal. This is the oldest magic, the transformation that occurs in darkness while consciousness is suspended. You will emerge from this sleep changed, however subtly, refreshed, and ready for whatever the new day brings. At least you have chicken, and that's enough. The phrase has meaning beyond its literal content, a reminder that the simple things matter most. Whatever grand plans may have failed today, whatever ambitious projects may have gone awry, the basic pleasures of life remain available. Food, rest, the company of those who care about you, these are the foundations upon which everything else is built. Leeroy Jenkins understood this, perhaps better than his more strategic guildmates. While they calculated percentages and debated cooldowns, he stepped away to make himself a plate of chicken. The planning would happen with or without him, but the chicken would get cold if he waited too long. Priorities, in his view, were clear. There is wisdom in that simplicity, a recognition that virtual achievements pale in comparison to physical comforts. The raid will reset, the bosses will respawn, the gear will eventually be replaced by better gear. But the chicken is real, and it is here now, and it deserves attention. Apply that wisdom to your own life in whatever form it takes. Do not sacrifice the simple pleasures in pursuit of abstract goals. Remember to eat when you are hungry, to rest when you are tired, to enjoy the moment even when future plans demand attention. The Leeroys of the world may cause chaos, but they also remind us what matters most. Sleep now. The instance has reset. Tomorrow brings new adventures. But for now, there is only the peaceful darkness, the comfortable warmth, and the gentle embrace of rest that you have earned. The voice chat grows quiet. The guildmates log off one by one. The servers hum in distant data centers, maintaining worlds that will be there when you return. But you do not need to be there now. You need to be here, in this moment, in this bed, in this healing darkness. May the light protect you through the night, as paladins say in Azeroth. May your dreams be peaceful and your rest complete. May you wake with the energy and enthusiasm of someone charging into a new day, ready for whatever challenges await. Leeroy Jenkins. But quietly, gently, in the softest whisper of a battle cry, one that does not disturb the peace, but simply acknowledges the spirit of courage that lives in all of us. The warmth of gaming memories surrounds you like a comfortable blanket. The laughter shared with friends over countless hours of play, the triumphs and failures that made up your gaming journey, the connections formed across virtual worlds and real distances. All of these memories are part of who you are, treasures that no one can take from you. The legend of Leeroy Jenkins is now part of your story too. You have heard his tale from the early days of World of Warcraft through the cultural phenomenon he became to the lasting legacy he leaves in gaming history. This knowledge connects you to millions of others who share this common reference, part of the great tapestry of gaming culture that continues to grow with each passing year. Tomorrow, when you wake, you may remember fragments of this tale. Perhaps the battle cry will echo in your mind, a reminder to approach the day with enthusiasm and courage. Perhaps the lesson of the chicken will resurface, encouraging you to attend to simple pleasures. Or perhaps you will simply feel rested and refreshed, having spent your final waking moments in the company of a gaming legend. Whatever you remember, know that the story will be here whenever you wish to return. The legend of Leeroy Jenkins is eternal, preserved in video and in memory, passed from generation to generation of gamers who find meaning in his impulsive charge. You are now part of that tradition, a keeper of the legend, a member of the vast community that has laughed and learned from his famous wipe. Sleep well, dear listener. The legend rests now in the eternal memory of gaming history. And so do you. Time's up. Let's do this. Rest well. At least you have chicken. And sweet, peaceful, and wonderful dreams await you through the long and restful night ahead.